Hi, I'm Lyria. At 2 a.m., I open my door to find my sister, bruised, shivering, a child in her arms, collapsing against me. And before I could even process it, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Don't help that cripple. She's a traitor." That's when I realized this wasn't just family drama. This was war. And what happened next made my hands tremble as I dialed 911. Before we dive in, let me ask you, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I want to know. If this happened to you, what would you do? The pounding started like a bad dream. At first I thought it was part of one, something from the nightmare I'd been having about missing a deadline at work, until I realized the sound was too real, too sharp. I sat up, heart racing, straining to hear through the winter silence. It was nearly 2 in the morning. Nobody knocked at your door at that hour, unless it was bad news or trouble. I shuffled to the door, still in my old sweatshirt, my feet cold against the hardwood. The pounding came again, followed by a desperate voice. "Lyria, please! It's me! Open up!" That voice. I hadn't heard it in months, and yet I'd know it anywhere. Rowena. My fingers hovered over the deadbolt. Every family visit at this hour had ended badly. Years of conditioning had taught me that when family showed up unannounced, it meant chaos. And usually, Mom sent them. My pulse hammered as I undid the lock, and when I cracked the door open, the cold air slapped me awake. Rowena was standing there, or rather, barely standing. Her hair was wet with melting snow, strands stuck to her face, one eye swollen nearly shut. Her coat hung open, revealing a torn shirt. She was clutching Mira, her 9-year-old daughter, who sat stiffly in her wheelchair, clutching something small and silver to her chest. The sight made my stomach drop. Oh my God. What happened? Rowena didn't answer right away. Her knees buckled as soon as I reached for her, collapsing into me with a soft, pained sound. Mira's wheelchair hit the doorframe, but she held on tightly to that necklace. An old silver locket, one I hadn't seen since our grandmother died. Mira's face was pale, her wide eyes darting everywhere but mine. I wrestled the wheelchair inside with one hand and half-carried Rowena with the other. Her body was trembling, her ribs shifting under my arm in a way that told me something was seriously wrong. "Don't talk," I whispered, guiding her toward the couch. "You're safe now. Just sit." But was she safe? Was I? The questions bounced around my skull as I fumbled for blankets, water, anything to make them less like they'd been dragged in from hell. That's when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I thought about ignoring it. No good ever came from answering at times like this, but something told me I had to look. It was from Mom. "Don't help that cripple. She's a traitor." My hand went numb. I read it again, hoping I was misreading in my sleep-deprived haze. But no. Every word was there, ice-cold and deliberate. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mother, the woman who taught me to say grace before dinner, who drilled into us that family always comes first, had reduced my sister and her child to nothing more than burdens. Traitors. Rowena's soft moan pulled me out of my stupor. She was curled on my couch now, holding her side, trying to make herself smaller. Mira wheeled closer to her, still silent, her fingers wrapped around that necklace like it was the last safe thing in the world. Years of Mom's tough love came rushing back. How she'd call me weak whenever I showed emotion. How she told Rowena she should be grateful for scraps of kindness. But this wasn't tough love. This was cruelty, raw and unfiltered. I stared at the text, my chest tightening, knowing full well what defying Mom meant. She had a way of making you pay. But looking at Rowena, bruised and broken, and Mira, whose little body had already been through more than it should in 9 years, there wasn't a choice. "I'll get you some first aid," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I found an old medical kit under my bathroom sink, brought it back, and did what I could for the worst cuts, You need a doctor. Mira, sweetie, are you okay? She didn't answer, just tightened her grip on that locket. My hands were shaking when I finally picked up my phone. Not to text Mom back. No, she didn't deserve a response. I dialed 911. Portland Emergency Services. What's your emergency? My sister showed up at my apartment. She's been hurt. Badly. And I think this is domestic violence. My voice cracked. I gave them the address, answering their calm, methodical questions, while my mind screamed that this was going to blow up everything. But that didn't matter anymore. When I hung up, the room was silent, except for Rowena's unsteady breathing. She opened her good eye, looked at me, and whispered, "You don't know the whole story. It's worse than you think." Her words made my stomach twist, but I couldn't prepare for what she told me next. "It started months ago," Rowena whispered, her words so faint I almost missed them. The room was still dim, the only light coming from the small lamp by my couch. Mira was asleep on a pile of pillows I'd thrown together on the rug, still clutching that old locket like it held her together. Rowena sat curled up at the far end of the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach like she could hold in everything that had been broken. I leaned forward. "What do you mean? What happened?" She stared at the floor for what felt like forever before she finally spoke. "It was Derek. He'd been getting angrier for weeks, snapping over little things. But last night?" Her voice cracked and I felt my stomach twist. "He held a knife to my throat, Lyria. He said if I didn't hand over Mira's disability check, he'd make sure we'd both regret it." I froze, the words sticking in my throat. "He did what?" She nodded, eyes glassy. "It was over that check. He said we were leeches, just bleeding him dry. Then he—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her rib like remembering it made it throb worse. "He kicked me twice. And when Mira tried to grab his arm, he shoved her wheelchair so hard she nearly tipped over. He didn't even care." My hands tightened around the blanket on my lap. "And Mom, did she—" Rowena laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "She was right there, Lyria, watching. I thought I don't know, maybe she'd tell him to stop. But you know what she said? She told us to get out. Like we were trash she was tired of looking at." I felt my jaw clench. She saw all of that and just let it happen? She didn't just let it happen. She backed him up. Said we'd brought it on ourselves, that I should be grateful Derek was still putting up with me. Rowena's voice shook as she continued. "That's when I knew. I couldn't stay. I couldn't let Mira grow up thinking this is what love looks like." I thought back. How many times had I seen Mom let Derek's behavior slide? The snide comments at Thanksgiving, the way she'd always excuse his temper as stress. And every time I stayed quiet. We both did. I swallowed hard, feeling shame creep in. "So you came here?" Rowena nodded slowly. "I remembered your Christmas card had your address. I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I knew you. You wouldn't send us away." Something in my chest tightened at that. "No, I wouldn't." Mira stirred, her small voice breaking through the silence. "Are we safe here?" It was like a punch to the gut. I reached over and smoothed her hair back. "Yes, sweetheart. You're safe now." I hoped I sounded more certain than I felt. I knew what I had to do. Sitting there, listening to my sister recount the worst night of her life while our mother stood by and watched, something inside me hardened. I couldn't just clean her wounds and hope things blew over. This needed to be documented. "Rowena," I said, picking up my phone, "I need to take pictures of your injuries. We're going to make sure no one can deny what he did." She hesitated, but nodded. I snapped photo after photo, her bruised ribs, the cut near her collarbone, the purple swelling around her eye. Each click of the camera felt like an indictment. Then I opened my messages and started saving every text Derek had sent her. Threats, insults, things I wouldn't have believed if I wasn't staring right at them. "I want you to tell me everything," I said softly, opening my voice recorder. "Every detail about last night and about before. It's important." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded again. Her voice was low and shaky as she recounted the night in full, starting from the fight over the check to the moment she stumbled out into the freezing air with Mira. When she finished, I squeezed her hand. "We'll need this when the time comes. You're not alone in this anymore." Rowena leaned back, exhausted, but then her gaze darkened. "And that's not the worst of it." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward Mira, then back at me. "They've been taking her money for months. Every disability check. Mom and Derek have been splitting it, like it's theirs." Her words felt like another knife in my chest, and I knew I had to find out where that money had gone. I opened my laptop, determined to trace every cent, my fingers cold against the keyboard as I woke the machine from sleep. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of pipes. Rowena sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly, eyes red but dry now. She had said everything she could for one night, and I could feel the weight of her exhaustion pressing into the room. Mira sat at the end of the table, sketching something on a notepad with a dull pencil, her necklace still dangling from her small fingers. I took a deep breath. "Okay," I said, more to myself than to them. "Let's see what we can find." Rowena gave me her login information, her voice low and almost apologetic, as if her own suffering required an apology. I shook my head at that thought and began typing, pulling up her online banking first. My brain switched into its old familiar mode, the same one I used at work when debugging a tangled mess of code. And it felt safer, focusing on numbers and data instead of faces and bruises. "Do you remember when the first check disappeared?" I asked. She furrowed her brow. "About 8 months ago. That's when Derek started taking over the mail. He said it was for organization." I clicked through her statements. There it was. The first missing deposit, replaced with a transfer out the same day. My gut clenched as I traced the routing number. "This wasn't even staying in your account," I muttered. "What do you mean?" "They rerouted it." My voice sounded flat, detached, but inside I was boiling. "Straight into a joint account. Mom's name is on it. And Derek's." Rowena closed her eyes. "I knew it." My hands moved faster now, screenshotting every statement, every transaction. The pattern was too clear. Month after month, Mira's disability checks, money meant to support a little girl with real needs, siphoned away. And for what? I scrolled further and nearly dropped the mouse. "You've got to be kidding me." Rowena leaned forward. "What is it?" "Cruises. They took a week-long trip to the Bahamas in June. Look." I turned the screen toward her, pointing to the charges. "And here, home renovations, $5,000. Did they remodel anything?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "No. That's when they bought that ridiculous hot tub Derek wanted." I felt a surge of heat crawl up my neck. Mira's quiet drawing in the corner caught my eye, her small fingers still fiddling with her locket as she sketched crooked flowers. That locket was probably the only thing that was really hers, and they were out there sipping cocktails in the Bahamas on her money. "They used her checks," I said, my voice trembling, "to fund their vacations, their luxuries, all while you two were living like this." Rowena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Then she took a deep breath, like she'd been holding something back. "There's more." I looked up at her sharply. "What more could there possibly be?" She hesitated, then said, "Before I left, I found some paperwork Derek was hiding in his desk. It wasn't finished yet, but it was for custody. He's trying to declare me unfit. He wants Mira. Full custody." The words hit me like a slap. Unfit? He's the one threatening you with a knife. That's why I ran, she whispered. Once he has Mira, the checks go straight to him. And Mom, she won't fight him on it. She'll back him, like she always does. My mind spun. They weren't just stealing. They were setting up a permanent trap. Strip Rowena of her rights, take Mira, and secure the money for themselves. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the laptop screen, seeing nothing but white noise for a moment. Years of helping out, sending money for emergencies, all flashed through my mind. I'd been their safety net, their banker. And Mira? She was nothing more than a meal ticket to them. You were their bank, Rowena, I said, my voice low. And Mira was their meal ticket. She didn't argue. She didn't even flinch. She just nodded like she'd known it all along but needed me to say it out loud. That was when the numbness broke. I started saving everything. Screenshots of statements, copies of transactions, anything that could become evidence. I created a timeline, documenting dates, amounts, and the trips they'd taken. I organized it all into folders. They won't take another cent, I said finally, my voice steady now. Or Mira. For the first time, Rowena looked at me with something like hope. Just as I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed on the table. A new voicemail. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I stared at it for a moment, my fingers hovering. It's from her. Rowena's face went pale. I pressed play, and my mother's voice was colder than I'd ever heard, and far more dangerous. If you embarrass me again, I'll make you both disappear. My mother's voice slithered out of the voicemail like smoke, cold and deliberate. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white as I replayed her words in my head. Each sentence landed like a slap, calculated and sharp. You think you can humiliate me? I can make one phone call, and social services will take that child. Do you hear me? One phone call. I know people. Don't test me. I stood frozen at the kitchen table, the phone still pressed to my ear even after the voicemail ended. My own breathing sounded too loud, out of place in the stillness of the room. Rowena was perched on the edge of her chair, her body rigid, her face blank in that way people get when they're trying not to fall apart. Mira kept sketching at the table, humming faintly to herself, too young to understand the full weight of the threat, but not too young to feel the tension that filled the air like static. She means it, Rowena finally whispered, her voice breaking. She's done this before. She's made that call. I turned to her. What are you talking about? Rowena blinked, and the tears came all at once, spilling over as she buried her face in her hands. Years ago, she choked out, when I tried to leave Derek the first time. She told me if I kept running my mouth, she'd have Mira placed somewhere else. She said I didn't know how to take care of my own daughter, and that I'd lose everything if I didn't start behaving. I felt my chest tighten, anger rising up so fast I thought I'd choke on it. It wasn't enough for my mother to take sides. She had to wield power like a weapon, turning her connections into threats. Suddenly, every condescending remark, every "I know what's best" she'd ever thrown at me snapped into focus. She wasn't protecting her family. She was protecting her image, even if it meant destroying us to do it. I sat down, the phone still in my hand, my thoughts racing. I'd spent my entire life following her rules, keeping my head down, avoiding conflict, swallowing every bitter word because it was easier than fighting back. But this was different. This was her using her influence to terrorize her own daughters and a child. Rowena's sobs filled the room, the sound guttural and raw. I wanted to comfort her, but I also needed to think, to do something before this spiral went any further. She can't get away with this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Rowena looked up, her face red and streaked with tears. What are you going to do? We can't fight her. She has people. She knows how to make things disappear. I opened my phone's recorder, hit play on the voicemail, and recorded the entire thing. Then I emailed it to myself, saved it to cloud storage, and backed it up on my laptop. She wants a war? I said quietly. Fine. We'll fight on paper. On record. Where she can't twist the story. Rowena stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I couldn't entirely believe it either, but something inside me had snapped. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mira watching me. She pulled at the clasp of her necklace, then slid it off her neck and held it out to me. "Keep it safe," she said softly. "Just in case. If I have to go away." The room fell silent. I took the necklace from her tiny hand and felt the weight of it. Not just the metal, but the fear of what those words meant. It wasn't just a trinket anymore. It was her way of saying she was scared of being taken. I wanted to tell her that wouldn't happen, that she was safe here, but the words felt too fragile in the face of reality. I set the necklace on the table beside my phone and drew in a deep breath. "No one is taking you anywhere," I said firmly, more for myself than for Mira. The moment stretched until it broke with a knock at the door, a firm, deliberate knock that sent a jolt through me. I rose slowly, crossing to the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Peering through the peephole, I froze. Derek. He was standing there, dressed neatly, a bouquet of flowers in his hands, and a smile plastered on his face like none of this had happened. But his eyes told me he wasn't here for peace. He raised the bouquet like it was some kind of offering, the cheap plastic wrapping crinkling in his hand, but the look in his eyes told me everything. This wasn't an apology. This was theater. "Nicole," he said, drawing my name out like we were old friends, like he hadn't thrown my sister and niece out into the snow a few nights ago. "I just want to take my girls home. Let's not make this ugly." His tone was syrupy, the kind of sweetness that sticks in your throat until you gag. I kept the door wedged with my foot, open only enough to see him and nothing more. The cold morning air bit at my face, but I didn't move. "They're not going anywhere with you." My voice came out calmer than I expected. Behind me, I could sense Rowena on the couch, clutching one of the throw pillows like it could shield her. Mira stayed at the kitchen table, her little hands still moving her pencil over paper, but I knew she was listening. Children always know when something's wrong. Derek gave a low laugh, shaking his head like I was being dramatic. "Nicole, you don't have kids. You wouldn't understand. She's not in a good place right now. She needs help. And Mira," he gestured toward the apartment like it was his right to point into my home. "Mira needs stability. We can give her that. My mother can give her that." I followed his gaze past him to the car parked by the curb. Marjorie sat there in the passenger seat, sunglasses on despite the cloudy morning. She didn't even pretend to look away when I caught her staring. Of course, she'd send him to do her dirty work. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice still level. "You threw them out, and now you want me to believe you're here for their well-being?" His expression shifted, barely, but enough. He licked his lips and leaned closer. "Let's be real. Rowena's unstable. You know it. I've been picking up the pieces for years." "She's lucky I haven't called the police already." "Police?" I echoed. "That's right." His fake concern hardened into something sharper. "She took Mira without permission. I'm still on that lease, Nicole. You know what that means? I can walk into that apartment anytime I want, or I can call the cops and say you're harboring a runaway child. How's that going to look for you, with your fancy tech job?" For a moment I couldn't breathe. The audacity of him standing here, threatening me, while holding a bouquet like this was some hallmark moment made my skin crawl. I noticed his hand twitch slightly as he shifted the flowers to his other arm. That was Derek. Always performing. Gentleman on the outside, monster behind closed doors. I didn't back away. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, pressed record, and held it up between us. "Say that again," I told him. "Say it clearly, for the camera. How you threw Rowena and Mira out in the cold." How you've been taking Mira's disability checks? Say it nice and clear." His jaw tightened, and for the first time since I opened the door, the mask cracked. His voice dropped, quiet but venomous. "You always thought you were better than us." I tilted my head, not flinching. "No, I just refuse to be like you." For a second I thought he might lunge, but instead he stepped back, the smirk plastered back onto his face as quickly as it had fallen. "You think this is over?" He chuckled, but it sounded hollow. "It's not over, Nicole. Not by a long shot." He turned, walking back to the car with a swagger that didn't match the way his shoulders stiffened. Marjorie didn't move as he slid in beside her, though I could swear her knuckles tightened around her purse. I watched them drive away, my pulse pounding in my ears, knowing this wasn't the last time I'd see them. When I finally closed the door, I leaned against it, feeling the weight of my own heartbeat in my chest. "They're going to try to take her from me," Rowena said from the couch, her voice barely audible. "I know it." I didn't turn to look at her because I didn't want her to see my face. She was right, and I couldn't tell her how terrified that made me, too. I stared at the envelope like it might burn me if I touched it. Thick, official, stamped in red. Urgent. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, pulling out a stack of papers that felt heavier than they should have. A court summons, an emergency custody hearing. For a moment, my brain couldn't process the words. They blurred together. Neglect, emotional instability, unsafe environment. It wasn't just about Rowena anymore. My name was in there too. They accused me of harboring Mira, of keeping her from her legal guardian. Rowena sat across from me, knees pulled up to her chest like a child, her face as pale as the paper in my hands. "They're going to take her," she whispered. Her voice cracked on every word. "They're going to take my baby." I tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasp. "No, they won't." She ripped the papers from my hands and skimmed them. When she reached the last page, she let out a sound I'll never forget. Not a sob, not a scream, but something in between. "They called me unfit, Lyria. Unfit. Like I'm some monster who doesn't love my own daughter." Her hands shook so hard she dropped the papers onto the coffee table. Mira didn't look up from where she sat on the floor, drawing with quiet focus. She was sketching a house with a big window and a tree in the yard. I wondered if that's what safety looked like to her, some place she'd never had. Rowena buried her face in her hands. "They always win. They did this before. With Ethan. You remember Ethan, don't you?" Her voice went soft, almost apologetic, like she wasn't sure she had the right to bring him up. I hadn't heard that name in years. Ethan, her first child. She lost custody of him when she was barely 20, and Derek and Mom had framed it as Rowena's bad choices. I used to believe them. "They're not going to win this time," I said, more to convince myself than her. She shook her head. "You don't know them like I do. They'll find a way. They'll make me look like a mess, and they'll make you look like some accomplice. They know people in the system. Mom's been talking about it for years. Connections, she calls them." Her words scraped at my insides, but I forced myself to stay steady. I couldn't afford to panic. "No more reacting the way they want," I said slowly. "No more screaming matches. We fight smart. We fight on paper. That's where they can't twist the truth." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, gathering everything we had. Screenshots of Marjorie's texts, the voicemail where she threatened to make us disappear, photos of Rowena's bruises, bank statements showing where Mira's disability checks had gone. Every file went into a secure drive and onto an external hard drive I kept in my work bag. The next morning, I called every women's advocacy group in Portland I could find. After hours of being put on hold and leaving messages, one of them finally called back. They connected us with Diane, a family lawyer who handled abuse and custody cases pro bono. We met her 2 days later in a tiny office that smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Diane was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a voice that made you feel like she could take on the world and win. "I've seen worse cases than yours," she said after hearing everything. "And I've won them." Rowena looked at her like she was a lifeline thrown into deep water. "Do you really think we have a chance?" Diane nodded. "We do. But you need to follow my lead. No outbursts in court, no emotional spirals. You present yourself as calm, consistent, and focused on Mira's best interests. They want to paint you as unstable. We don't give them the satisfaction." I liked her immediately. She didn't sugarcoat anything, but she made the impossible feel doable. Over the next few days, we built our case. Diane walked us through everything: how to organize the evidence, how to answer questions without letting our emotions get the better of us, how to survive the character assassination we knew was coming. On our last prep meeting before the hearing, Diane closed her notebook and looked us both in the eye. "They're going to come at you hard, especially your mother," she warned. "You need to be ready for anything." Rowena swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can face her." "You can," Diane said simply. "Because you're not fighting her. You're fighting for Mira." Her words lodged themselves in my chest. That night, after Rowena and Mira had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the pile of documents and evidence we'd gathered. My hands hovered over the files, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't just fear or anger. It was resolve. They'd used paperwork and connections to destroy us before. This time, we'd use the same tools to fight back. So, she smiled sweetly at the judge, like she hadn't left her bruised daughter bleeding in the snow. That's what hit me first, the audacity of it. Marjorie walked into that courtroom like she was there to accept an award. Pearls perfectly aligned, soft pastel suit, hair curled into a style that said "church lady who brings cookies to the neighbors." I almost laughed. Almost. The courtroom was as cold and still as a museum. Every sound, the scrape of a chair, the soft shuffle of papers, echoed. Mira sat at the back with a social worker, clutching her necklace so tightly I could see the silver chain cut into her fingers. Rowena sat beside me, trembling despite Diane's earlier coaching. "Stay composed. Don't let them rattle you," Diane had said on repeat for 2 weeks. Marjorie and Derek took their seats on the opposite side like they owned the place. Derek, in his polished suit, all fake solemnity, his hand resting over Marjorie's like they were grieving saints. Then it started. Marjorie's lawyer called her to the stand, and she floated up there like she was giving a testimony at Sunday service. "I'm here because I'm deeply concerned for my granddaughter's well-being," she began, voice steady, warm, almost maternal. "This situation has been heartbreaking to witness. My daughter Rowena has been struggling emotionally for some time, and Lyria—" She glanced at me with a look so saintly I wanted to throw something. "While well-meaning, has been manipulated into supporting this instability. My only goal is to ensure Mira has a safe, loving environment." I gripped the edge of my chair so hard my knuckles ached. She went on, each word carefully designed to sting. Rowena was unreliable. Mira had been placed in unsafe situations. And me? I was interfering, enabling poor decisions, and escalating tensions within the family. She painted herself as a martyr. Derek nodded along, his face a mask of concern. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed them. Rowena's turn came and she froze. Even with Diane's guidance, I saw her fall apart in real time. Her voice cracked, her hands shook. She tried to answer questions, but Marjorie's lawyer pressed hard, turning every slip into proof of her incompetence. Rowena looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout that Marjorie was a liar, that Derek was a manipulative fraud. But Diane had warned me. Emotional outbursts only helped them. When it was our turn, Diane stood, calm as a surgeon about to make an incision. "Mrs. Clark," she began, her tone polite but sharp, "you've spoken at length about your deep concern for Mira. Tell me, is threatening to make your daughter and granddaughter disappear part of that concern?" Marjorie blinked, confused for half a second. Excuse me? Diane didn't flinch. Let me refresh your memory. She nodded to the clerk, and suddenly the courtroom filled with Marjorie's voice, that venomous voicemail. If you embarrass me again, I'll make you both disappear. I can take Mira with one phone call. The air shifted. The judge's expression hardened. The sweet, church-going grandmother act cracked. Marjorie stammered, trying to explain, but there was no explaining that recording away. Derek leaned toward her, whispering something through clenched teeth. Whatever their alliance had been, it was unraveling in real time. Diane let the silence do the work. No further questions, she said, her voice cool. The judge looked down at the papers before him, then up at all of us. This court will deliberate and issue a temporary custody ruling, he said. Until then, Mira stays with her mother. Rowena squeezed my hand under the table, tears spilling silently down her face. Marjorie's sweet smile vanished as soon as the gavel fell, and I knew she wasn't done fighting. And that night Marjorie called. Not to apologize, but to promise she'd destroy me for humiliating her. I was sitting at the kitchen table, still in my work clothes, staring at the stack of papers Diane had given us. Rowena had finally fallen asleep on the couch, Mira curled against her like a kitten, her little hand still clutching that silver necklace. For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt still. And then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice immediately. You think you've won? Marjorie's voice came through, sharp and dripping with venom. You think humiliating me in front of that judge makes you strong? You don't know the first thing about winning. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your little reputation, and that child. She'll never be yours to protect. She belongs with family. Her real family. I said nothing at first. Let her talk. It wasn't the first time I'd heard my mother threaten me, but this wasn't the passive-aggressive, you'll regret this one day I'd grown up with. This was something darker, deliberate. Are you done? I finally said. My voice surprised me. Calm, steady. She laughed, a bitter little sound that didn't belong to the pastel-suited church lady who'd sat in that courtroom earlier. Oh, sweetie, I'm just getting started. I've already talked to people, social services, people at your company. You think they'll keep you around once they know you're harboring a kidnapped child? You think that fancy little career of yours means anything when I decide to tear it down? You're threatening me, I said, still flat, even. I'm promising you, she hissed. You've turned Mira against her family. You've turned my own daughter against me. But I can fix that. One phone call. That's all it takes. For a split second, my chest tightened. Not for myself, but for Mira, for Rowena, asleep and exhausted in the other room. This wasn't about custody anymore. It wasn't about who could play the better grandmother in court. It was about power. My mother wanted to break me, to make me crawl back into the role I'd been in all my life, the quiet one who didn't fight back. But something in me had shifted these last few weeks. I stood, walking slowly toward the window, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass. You know, I said, I used to be afraid of you. All those years. I thought if I just kept quiet, you'd stop hurting me. Hurting us. But you don't stop. You never stop. Watch yourself, she snapped, that composed voice unraveling. No, I said, my tone sharper now. You watch yourself. There was silence on her end for a moment. That stunned pause when someone realizes the script isn't going the way they expected. You like threatening people? Good. Because now you get to threaten the police, too. Her voice faltered. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the formal complaint I filed 2 days ago. The one that went to the state attorney's office. The one with every screenshot of those stolen disability checks. Every medical report. And my favorite part? That little voicemail you left. You know, the one where you said you could make us disappear? They loved hearing that. You wouldn't. Oh, I did. Her breathing changed. Short, shallow. She was cracking. You can call whoever you want, Mom, I said, letting that word land heavy. But just remember, when you threaten me again, you're not just talking to me anymore. The police are listening now, too. You wouldn't dare ruin your family like this, she stammered. You already did that, I said, and then I hung up. The silence after was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that felt like reclaiming air you'd been choking on for years. I went back to the kitchen table and sat down, my hands finally steady. Rowena stirred, waking just enough to whisper, "What happened?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I said softly. "Get some rest. We're safe tonight." My phone buzzed again, but this time it was Diane. "I just got off the phone with the investigator," she said. "They've opened a criminal investigation into your mother and Derek. Theft, fraud, child endangerment. This is bigger than custody now." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words settle in. Bigger than custody. Bigger than them. For the first time, I felt like we might actually win. But I knew it would come at a cost. 3 months later, we sat in the same courtroom. But this time, it wasn't just about custody. It was about justice. Walking back into that room felt like stepping into a memory, but everything had shifted. The polished wood still gleamed, the air still smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, but I wasn't the same woman who had sat there trembling months ago. I felt the weight of what was ahead, yes, but I also felt grounded. Rowena sat beside me, her hair brushed neatly back, her face no longer hollow from weeks of fear. Even Mira seemed lighter, sitting quietly with the social worker, drawing small looping shapes in her notebook. And then they came in. Marjorie entered first. Gone were the pearls and pastel suits. Her hair looked unkempt, and the powder on her face couldn't hide the deep lines carved by stress. Derek followed, his jaw tight, his expensive suit doing little to mask how cornered he looked. They didn't glance our way, but I saw Marjorie mutter something sharp to him, and he jerked his shoulder away. Whatever alliance they had was unraveling. Diane leaned toward us, her voice a calm whisper. "Today, we finish this." When the judge entered, the room hushed. "This hearing addresses both the ongoing custody case and criminal proceedings related to financial exploitation and child endangerment," he said. His tone was clipped, deliberate. Diane stood, her posture perfectly straight, and began presenting the evidence. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. Every screenshot, every bank record, every medical document painted the picture for us. Months of Mira's disability checks siphoned into Marjorie and Derek's account. Spa trips, cruises, home repairs that were never done. Diane's voice didn't waver as she replayed the voicemail. My mother's voice hissing threats like she hadn't spent decades pretending to be the saintly matriarch. The prosecutor added his own statement, confirming the financial audit's findings. "The funds meant for Mira's care were misappropriated for personal luxuries," he said flatly. "This court must address not only custody, but restitution and criminal accountability." Marjorie tried to speak up then, her voice cracking. "This is out of context." The judge's hand went up sharply. "Mrs. Howard, you will remain silent unless addressed directly. This court will not tolerate intimidation or fraud. Do you understand?" She swallowed hard and nodded, her composure slipping further. And then Derek broke. "This was her idea," he blurted, pointing at Marjorie. "She told me it was legal. She said no one would notice." "Mr. Howard," the judge said sharply, "enough." Watching them turn on each other in public should have felt satisfying, but all I felt was tired. Tired of the years they stole from my sister. Tired of the fear they fed Mira. But beneath that exhaustion, a quiet flame of vindication burned. The judge shuffled through the paperwork before him, then set it down with finality. The court finds substantial evidence of financial exploitation and emotional abuse, he said. Effective immediately, full custody of Mira Howard is granted to her mother, Rowena Howard. Mr. Derek Howard is stripped of all parental rights. Mrs. Marjorie Howard is granted only supervised visitation at the discretion of Child Services. Furthermore, restitution for the stolen funds, including interest, is ordered, and criminal charges for fraud and child endangerment will proceed. Rowena's hand flew to her mouth as the tears spilled over. I reached for her hand, gripping it tight. For the first time in years, I saw her exhale like she could finally breathe again. Mira looked up from her drawing when the social worker told her she'd be going home with her mom. She grinned, and for just a moment, all the courtroom noise faded. As we packed up our things, Mira toddled over and pressed her little silver necklace into my hand. "You kept me safe," she said simply. I couldn't speak. I just knelt down and hugged her, holding on like I'd never let go. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, crisp, almost clean. Rowena stood beside me, Mira perched on her hip, and for the first time in a long time, we weren't looking over our shoulders. Justice doesn't look like joy. It looks like safety. It looks like a little girl laughing without fear. As we walked away from that building, I thought about all the years we'd spent trying to survive them, the people who were supposed to love us. They broke us, but they also taught us what strength really is. And we're never going back.